After months of gathering parts and study and assembling to make a female for the male, everything was finally ready to reanimate the female and end Victor's nightmare. He will have been rid of the monster whom has threatened his life and killed those close to him, he thought. He just hoped his plan would prevail. While building the female, he had come up with a plan to truly get rid of his mistakes. He has planned that he shall bring both monsters out into the middle of nowhere in a cottage, like the one the male had mentioned stalking before. And this is where having good connections comes in handy. Half the reason it took so long to get the female ready is because he was stalling. He had contacted a friend in the military, known as General Stevens, who was the only other person to know of what he had done for a short time. He agreed to help Victor to keep his and all other families safe from these beings. While Victor was creating the female, Stevens and some of his forces were setting a trap for the creatures that made it so once they entered within 10 miles of the cottage, they could not leave. Well, unless you had the right fingerprints. This technology will keep the monsters from leaving, no matter what they try. And Victor and Stevens agreed that if someone were to stumble into the trap, they would be left there. They were going to be putting up warning signs around, but after that, it was on their own fate on what people choose to do. There are no roads and there are no paths leading to the cottage, so hopefully no one will end up in there. They had prepared a garden of all corn and a steady home with trees and a flowing river that passes to make sure to keep them stably living. Victor had promised the beast a life with a female. He did not say it would be a comfortable one, but it will be a sustainable one. In this prison, Victor had decided is where he shall reanimate the female tonight, and hereafter will leave and never have to think about any of this ever again. He will be free. He will always feel responsible for his brother's and Justine's death, but the least he could do is make sure that no more lives are taken at his fault, so he thought. Now you ask about Walton. Does he still end up in the story, you ask? It turns out Walton and Victor had a common friend, being Commander Stevens. Stevens had asked Walton and his crew to help build the trap. His crew had no idea what the trap was for, but Walton did. Stevens was never good at hiding things from him, and after a week of bothering, he convinced Stevens to tell him. He found Frankenstein's work remarkable and eventually convinced Stevens to set up a meeting for him and Victor. Victor at first was furious, especially when he has to see the notes of his and notes of others, but Walton never did see them. Victor came around after a while and they became good friends. Victor's plan did go through, without a problem. In fact, the monsters still haven't figured out they are trapped, or at least they don't pay attention to the fact. After a year, Walton began to become curious, and couldn't help but wonder how they were doing. He wandered near the edges until eventually he wandered too close and was in the trap himself. He was hoping Stevens was still keeping surveillance and had sent help, but truth be told, there was no help coming. While he still had hope, he looked around and decided to try and study the monsters. At the beginning, he was terrified at first glance. He kept his distance and still watched, while gathering himself. He soon learned, though, that they were pretty much human. They have not looked so much, but they did act it. They ate and slept and drank like us. They had tools, they made their own, they had their own books made up, or made from memory of what the male had read before. They even named themselves, the male being Adam and the female being Justine. Justine was pretty much one of the very few female names that Adam had heard of, and so he thought it would be nice. Well, it was that or her choice of Ugh. After After a few days, he had mustered himself up to confront Adam and Justine, and to his shock, it seemed they were more scared of him than he them. After realizing it, he sat down and told them he didn't want to hurt them and just wanted to understand them. They were still unsure until he didn't leave the spot for at least 3 hours staring at a wall. 3 hours of his life he'll never get back, I might add. They sunset and the three began talking slowly. He learned that Justine had still been learning to talk and could only understand when they talked slowly. She herself could only say a handful of things such as food, water, sleep, danger, help, and pretty much the essential words. Adam was reading and spelling and sounding out words with her like he learned watching the cottagers before, but it seemed she learned a bit slower than both Adam and the lady from Paris. They knew that they were caged, but they didn't mind it because of all the space they had for living. Walton told them he wouldn't be too long staying, keeping up their space because of his hopes. But after weeks, he gave up. Walton learned to live with and help them much as he could, and this was now his life. He lived with monsters that were more like people, whom became friends. Adam had once told him that he had a childish dream of having a flower shop if he were to live side by side with humans, and he sure did enjoy the flowers he had in the meadow. Over the years, Justine's English became much better, and started to make up her own stories like Adam. More people stumbled into the trap, and at first they were all scared. But nearly all came around, and in a matter of years there was an actual village developed, and Adam had even opened the little flower shop he wanted. Justine became the storyteller of the village, and Walton pretty much tried to copy Victor's work after Adam had mentioned wanting a child. So he was the animator/doctor of the village. No, he did not have to kill anyone. Instead of being organ donors after death, they had body donors. Walton never left the village. No one did. And not because they were trapped. After Victor had passed age 60, he had gone senile, and due to all the madness in his life. One day he began to wander from Elizabeth while they were in the market, all because he had remembered the monsters and wanted to see them. He wandered all the way to Stephen's and asked to see them. When they both looked at security, they saw the village. Stephen sent in people to look into it, and Walton pretty much filled them in. A month later, the trap was taken down. Victor came with Elizabeth and were shocked to see what had happened over the years. But in the end, Victor had become friends with Adam. The end.